Operation Desert Storm in Iraq. And in Desert Storm, the US 7th Corps, which had the 1st Infantry Division, the 2nd Armoured Division, and task organised into it, which is the military language for saying it's been attached to it, the 1st UK Armoured Division, joining the Americans to help take Kuwait back after Saddam Hussein had invaded and captured Kuwait. What did 7th Corps do? Well, 7th Corps, in their planning for their operations, deployed into Saudi Arabia, decided that attacking in through Kuwait was not the way to do things and to take it back. What they decided to do was to carry out a left hook and hook around to try and interdict the Iraqi supply lines coming into their forces inside Kuwait and create that dilemma. The dilemma was for the Iraqi forces inside Kuwait whether to stay or whether to run. And at the same time, coming into the Al Faw Peninsula in Kuwait, there was maritime landings, giving the forces that the Iraqis had in Kuwait a real dilemma. But let's look at how the Corps then attacked in. What did they do? What were the preparations that were needed? And why have the Ukrainians had difficulty in copying this in their actions inside Ukraine? So what the Allied forces did for their hook into Iraq to create this dilemma for Iraqi forces inside Kuwait was they prepared the battle space. They spent 42 days bombing Iraqi defenses, bombing Iraqi operational level targets, their logistic hubs, their command and control, their supply depots, their roads, rail links, their communication links, destroying the defenses that were there. In the defenses, there was a berm, a big sandbank with an anti-tank ditch behind it, with mines behind that, and then behind that were the defensive lines of Iraqi troops dug into trenches, overwatched by artillery and tanks, waiting for the Allied forces to punch through. But the Allied air campaign, this 42 days, backed up by artillery, rocket artillery, MLRS, 155mm artillery, softening up the Iraqi defenses, but interspersed with a softer way of forcing them and softening them up by dropping leaflets on them. Because what they did was they turned around and dropped a leaflet on the Iraqi defensive position saying, we're going to attack your position from the air in about 45 minutes. We suggest you get up and run away. It was successful. Many of the Iraqi troops got up and run away. The Allied forces had the telephone numbers for many of the Iraqi commanders. They phoned them up to say, we're going to come and destroy your battalion, your brigade, your formation in about 45 minutes time. Best you surrender. And they dropped leaflets on giving free passes to those that had surrendered. Many of the Iraqi troops did leave their defensive positions and surrender. But those that stayed to fight were a much smaller number. That made the force that had to punch through that defensive position have a much easier fight than they would have done if the Iraqis had been at full strength. And in punching through, we saw combat engineers push the berm to one side, deal with the remnants of the minefields, fill in the anti-tank ditches with big fascine pipes and bulldozers, then push through to the Iraqi defensive lines. But just behind the engineers, the tanks came through, supported by armoured infantry, punching into the defensive lines and finishing off any of the Iraqi defences that were still there. Not that there were many. That allowed Allied forces to rapidly progress through and start to envelop Kuwait and then threaten the whole of Iraq before they then shifted and moved towards the threatened Baghdad. So US 7th Corps in Operation Desert Storm was successful in doing this. Why weren't the Ukrainians? Well, the Ukrainians don't have an air force to be able to bomb the Russian defences for 42 days. They don't have sufficient combat engineer capability to punch through the defensive lines. And the defensive lines that there are in the east that the Russians have put in, the Surovikin lines, are in 3 or 4 different banks. They are bigger, better, stronger than anything the Iraqis had put inside Kuwait. The Ukrainians didn't have the overwatch from air capability, from their artillery capability to overmatch anything that the Russians had there. So whenever the Ukrainians tried to punch through after getting Western tanks in the early days and Western infantry fighting vehicles to try and get in, they failed because none of the preparation had been done beforehand. And they came up against these significant defenses they were never going to get through. This shows how if you don't have everything in place, you're not going to win. If you have everything in place, you can make it easy. If you don't have everything in place, you will lose the battle.